Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our next webinar on the Assistance for Small and Disadvantaged Communities Drinking Water Grant. Today's webinar is going to be focused on work plan elements, so we're really glad that all of you could join us. A quick note that the webinar slides are available. They're located under the handout section of your screen in the right navigation bar. And then also too, to let you know that as you have questions as we're going along, please type those questions into the questions box that's also located on your screen, and we'll be answering your questions at the end of our presentations. So to get started, a quick disclaimer. So you'll be hearing from multiple presenters today. The EPA presentation has been reviewed and approved for public dissemination in accordance with EPA policies. The views expressed in this presentation are those of the speakers. And again, the purpose of the webinar today. So we just wanted to clarify some of the questions that we're getting, some repeat questions that we're getting from states about the cost share requirements, pre-award costs, and then of course, a reminder on those required work plan elements. And then we're also going to hear from two state speakers about their own work plan development. Both of these speakers, they've been working closely with their EPA regional offices to get their work plans drafted and approved and to try and get the funding out the door as quickly as possible. So a few quick reminders. So for, of course, this grant, as you all are aware of, the Assistance for Small and Disadvantaged Communities, there are statutory requirements about the types of communities being served under this grant. So the first thing is that the underserved community criteria. So how this grant is being awarded is EPA has been given the authority to award grants to states on behalf of an underserved community. So that underserved community criteria is very important, and it's very specific. So as you see there on your screen, what is an underserved community? According to this statute, it's A, a community that does not have household drinking water or wastewater services, or B, it's served by a public water system that violates or exceeds, as applicable, a requirement of a national primary drinking water regulation issued under Section 1412, including a maximum containment level, a treatment technique, and an action level. So the first thing in your work plans that we're going to be checking for is that the communities being served are going to meet this underserved community criteria. The next thing we're going to be checking for is, in addition to the underserved criteria, is that the communities being served are meeting the small and disadvantaged communities statutory criteria. So one thing to point out here by the statute, so what that means is A, a community that under affordability criteria established by the state, Section 1452 Big D3, is determined by the state to first be a disadvantaged community, or, that or is very important, to be a community that may become a disadvantaged community as a result of carrying out a project or activity under this grant program. Or, that or is important again, is a community with a population of less than 10,000 individuals, the administrator determines does not have the capacity to incur debt sufficient to finance a project or activity under this grant program. So we've gotten questions. Does the community need to be both small and disadvantaged, or small or disadvantaged? And you'll see the ors there in the statute. So what we're going to be checking for is that the communities are underserved and they're either or, they get the disadvantaged community criteria, or they have that small population criteria that lacks the capacity to incur debt. Now that second part there of lacking the capacity to incur debt, we're deferring to states in terms of how you are going to identify lacking the capacity to incur debt, and you'll write that up in your work plan, and then we'll have a dialogue with you on making sure that yes, all of those community statutory criteria are met for this grant program. Another quick reminder about the cost share requirements. So we have been getting a lot of questions about the cost share requirements. Of course, the main one that folks are concerned about, which we really understand, it is a significant lift, is that first requirement, and that's to pay not less than 45% of the total cost of the project or activity, which may include services, materials, supplies, or other in-kind contributions. So again, to point out here that 45%, it's related to total cost of the project or activity. So we're checking for that. The other thing to keep in mind is that that is just one of the 3 cost share requirements. So the other cost share requirements include the provision of any land, easements, rights-of-way, and relocations necessary to carry out the project or activity. And that third one there is on the payment of any operation and maintenance costs. So just a reminder to everyone, the 45% is the total project costs or the activity costs, and then numbers 2 and 3 are also cost share requirements by statute under this grant program. We've also been asked about potential sources of cost share. So financial resources are the most common forms of cost share. There's also the potential for in-kind services that can be used for cost share. Ineligible sources of cost share are other federal funds. In bold, you'll see they're in general, so unless explicitly allowed by statute, there are some other federal programs that are allowed to be used as cost share. So again, this is in general. And the other item we're flagging there in terms of ineligible sources of cost share are services or in-kind donations that do not directly benefit the work plan. So again, this needs to be tied directly to the work plan in order to count as cost share. Now, I know this next slide has a lot of information on there. That information is also in an FAQ on the website, so don't feel like this is the only place that you have access to it is on this webinar. So we did want to flag that exception about when I mentioned in the last slide about in general. So listed on this slide are just 2 examples of major federal programs whose funds may be eligible to be used to provide some of that 45% cost share. So again, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are 2 that we're flagging for your attention because we think there are some potentials for alignment between what you're proposing in your work plans and these other federal programs that may be able to help you with your cost share. So the first one there under the first bullet is the Department of Housing and Urban Development's Community Development Block Grant Program. Those funds can be used as cost share on other federal grants. And then the second one there is from the United States Department of Agriculture's Rural Development Water and Waste Disposal Loans Program. So that also, too, is something else to consider in terms of it may be used for meeting the 45% cost share requirement. Next item is related to pre-award costs. So we know some of you are looking at pre-award costs in terms of your work plans. So what are pre-award costs? So those are costs incurred prior to the beginning of the project or budget periods. Those costs must be necessary for efficient and timely performance of the work that you have in your work plan. They have to be allowable under the work plan and budget, and they need to be incurred within 90 calendar days before the federal award is made. So that's really important to note because, again, this program has its own unique requirements. It's different in terms of it being a federal grant program from your DWSRF program. So just want to make sure that distinction, everyone is aware of that. And also, too, to note that pre-award costs are incurred and done so at the recipient's risk. So EPA is not obligated in any way to cover those pre-award costs. So again, you'll need to have a dialogue with your EPA regional office. Also, that last bullet point there, costs incurred more than 90 calendar days prior to the grant's period of performance requires written approval from EPA. So again, the importance of dialoguing with your EPA regional office as you're developing your work plans. Next thing, and this is my last slide before we get to our speakers, just a reminder on the work plan requirements. So in the implementation document, there is a summary of the key work plan elements, and that's in the state implementation document. As long as you're paying close attention to that summary of key work plan elements and you've looked carefully at the implementation document and you're dialoguing with your EPA regional office, you should have everything there in your draft work plan that you're submitting. So to talk further about the work plans, we have our state speakers who have been generous enough to donate their time and their experience to help you all in terms of outlining how they've developed their work plans. And so our first speaker is from the state of Tennessee. That's Leslie Gillespie. Marthaler, and Leslie is currently the director of the Tennessee State Revolving Fund Loan Program at the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. She has over 20 years of experience as a consultant, federal employee, and state employee in engineering, environmental management, and also policy roles. She holds graduate degrees in engineering from the Georgia Institute of Technology and the George Washington University. So thank you so much, Leslie, for being willing to join us and present on your experience, and I'll go ahead and turn the floor over to you.
Thanks, Alyssa. Can we go to the next slide, please? I'm excited to talk to everybody today about what Tennessee has done. We got out there very, very early in this process, and we worked very, very closely with Cheryl Parsons and EPA Region 4. So that coordination was like instantaneous from the very beginning. And we kind of took the approach, and this is really in consultation with Region 4, we didn't want to do anything that would start to go awry of the 24-month, the 2-year performance period on this. We wanted to make sure that whatever work we were going to attempt to set forth could reasonably be accomplished without getting into a series of requests for extensions. And I believe that we've been able to do that. So one of the requirements was we needed to pull those communities, eligible communities needed to come off of our priority ranking list. So in going through the priority ranking list at the time and looking for communities who were focused not on big construction projects, but on something that was really planning and design oriented, and that also met the population, the small requirement of population 10,000 or less. We also wanted to make sure that we were looking at not just the small population, but economically distressed. The way that Tennessee looks at economic status for both our counties and our cities and municipalities, we look at the Appalachian Regional Commission's Index, which is updated annually, and we also have an ability to pay index here. And if the communities were meeting both of those criteria as distressed or at risk or as economically disadvantaged based on our ability to pay index, that's how we met that criteria to move forward. And also we coordinated very carefully to ensure what existed in the priority ranking list could also be seen by our enforcement and compliance branch here at TDEC, but even more importantly that EPA Region 4 and headquarters EPA were seeing those same things. And so we actually had 3 communities on our original list, and one of them dropped off because it just wasn't strongly enough meeting the issues based on compliance. And so the 2 that were left for us in terms of sub-awardees were the city of Clifton and the city of Spencer. And so you can see the populations here, the ability to pay index, 50 is the median, and so 40 is definitely below that median. These are 2 of the most, Wayne is one of the most distressed counties in Tennessee, and Van Buren also is in that bucket as well. Clifton was really having issues with excessive turbidities, NTUs, and so we're working to help them. And then the city of Spencer has just been having a very difficult time with disinfection byproducts. That's as a result of their source water, and also it's just exacerbated by aging and failing infrastructure. Both of these communities are challenged by aging, failing infrastructure and a lack of economic means to address those. And again, we only considered planning and design because we didn't want to get into a situation where we were overreaching. We took the approach, if you'll go to the next slide, please. We took the approach that, you know, these individuals were looking for a good technical plan. They are economically disadvantaged, so walking into big construction loans is very risky. They were working with consulting engineers already and trying to figure out what is the best approach for addressing this problem and getting the best technical plans and specifications in place before walking into bigger risk with a much larger construction loan. And so this really kind of segued nicely. We had a good fit with these communities. We also were able to, relatively easily break out the amount for the total award here across these two communities. There were a couple of other factors at play. Some investment had already been made in the city of Spencer by USDA Rural Development. And both of these, really Clifton was already on our radar screen, and we saw the opportunity to help the city of Spencer as an incredible bonus, as an incredible opportunity through this particular grant. Next slide. The city of Spencer, again, both of these are planning and design. Spencer is complex. Not only did they have the issue with disinfection byproducts because of a lot of iron and manganese in their source water, but they had also experienced some pretty severe drought and declining source water, and then just the problems with the plant. But the clear issue here is if we stay focused on doing the right thing to address the disinfection byproducts, the rest of it can be sorted out and we can come up with a better technical plan to go forward here. We also wanted to do this at no cost to the community if possible. And so we started working early. They had received a search grant from USDA-RD, which is a fairly small grant of about $25,000 to $30,000. And they had started trying to work on a preliminary engineering report. The issues of the complexity with that source water were such that we ended up needing to bring in the University of Memphis to help look at how we would address the source water issues and what will present, because we haven't done the analysis yet, what will present the best technically feasible and economically feasible solution for them. They can either mix that water, they can pump it straight up a hill, which is very costly. So there are other issues at play here, but the thing that we wanted to do is address the compliance issue, do it in the most cost-effective manner possible that would lead them to the most sustainable and long-lasting results. And the good thing about going with planning and design and just specific documents and analysis is that we don't have to worry quite so much about depreciation. And we'd like to save the depreciation issue for the construction piece of this to the greatest extent possible. The city of Clifton, Tennessee, also planning and design. Their biggest customer is actually a correctional facility, which presents all kinds of different challenges in the world of water infrastructure. And really, they were just having chronic issues with turbidity and had been working incredibly hard to basically optimize what they could to get that under control. But the bottom line is the overall age of the plant itself and the associated collection systems. The distribution system, wrong type of system. And so what we wanted to look at is the efficacy of getting them where they need to be. And we also entered into a tentative partnership with the Tennessee Department of Correction. We saw an opportunity there to create an apprenticeship program to have eligible inmates trained as being water operators and apprenticing through Clifton. So again, the idea is get the best technical plan in place so that they're more capable of moving forward and then dealing with the additional risk of having to look at a construction type of loan, either with us or with someone else. Ultimately, we're dedicated to trying to get them into compliance and the right answer. Next slide. So again, our goal was to help these communities develop the very, very best, most sound process forward, and we've really engaged across TDEC and across other agencies in the state to try to provide the best opportunity to do this. We've talked to our comptroller and had discussions about the intent of this grant and the ability to help these communities who may not be able to get this kind of help financially otherwise to address these issues. And so again, where we are talking about documents, plans, and analyses, we have established that, you know, we're going to be cautious about where depreciation is assessed here and ensure that it's only assessed in areas with true depreciation. And so our grant allotment was $736,000, and our total match for the state was $602,181. Because these were already small and disadvantaged communities and the state budgets had already been finalized, so the municipal budgets had been finalized, presenting this to them at the time that it became available would have been a cost that they had not been able to prepare for. And so we chose to meet our requirements through appropriated funds. This is very much in line with the goal of our governor to help small, disadvantaged and rural communities. And so we sought that actively and repeatedly through our leadership, and we were able to secure that in terms of approval for the state budget. So we felt very fortunate that these things coalesced and that we had the leadership support from TDEC and in other areas to be able to successfully get that match. We successfully received that match, and again, I think, you know, early coordination on all of these fronts was really key to making sure that we could move forward without incurring more distress to these communities with surprise cost or anything else, and trying to kind of keep them on a really straight and narrow path that they'll be able to succeed with. Next slide. We did have some unexpected things kind of occur. So it's been a while since SRF in Tennessee has put grants out. And since then, you know, new documents, new templates, grant contracts, different types of code have been assessed for the state. And we ended up having to get some rule exceptions at the state level pushed through. Right now, our grant contracts typically read that a subawardee needs to pay with receipts, right? So they need to pay first and then ask for the money. And so what we were able to do in coordinating very closely with EPA Region 4 is to make the case and provide documentation that since these grants are being administered through SRF, we would use SRF requirements based on cost incurred or invoices as opposed to actual receipts. And so we had to go through a process of getting language approved, but then we also wanted to make sure that we had appropriate internal controls in place, and that while the first payment request would be based off of invoices, we would have a reconciliation process in place. And so we actually had to go through 2 rule exceptions through multiple kind of layers of the state to make this a reality for folks. But we think we have a nice template going forward. Next slide. So the key issues from that are work really closely with your local grant offices and finance and administration and whoever is in that process in terms of approving the document. If it's been a while since your organization has put grants out through SRF, just make sure that all the pieces fit together. It certainly was never something we thought we couldn't do, but it did take us a little bit of time. And we did need to accommodate for that. And EPA Region 4 and Headquarters EPA gave us, you know, we kind of had to say, okay, well, this is going to take a couple of months to remedy. But we were able to move through approval of that and kind of continue forward. Next slide. Right now, where we stand on these, we have an approved grant document that has made it through our contracting office and has already been sent to Clifton. The city of Clifton has signed that and sent it back on March 4th, 2020. So now that is currently in the process of being approved right now at the state level. They already have their engineering procurement contract in place. So once all of those documents are legally signed, we'll be in a good place to move forward. The city of Spencer is a little bit more complex because we actually have two contracts that the city needs to put out, one for their engineering procurement and then another with the University of Memphis. And we're getting help from within TDEC through a program where we are partnering with both public and private universities. And so we're getting a boost from that and trying to extend our relationships with those academic institutions. Again, we kind of had to do a little more footwork there. It's taken a little longer, but we're getting very close to finalizing that as well and getting it out the door. And then we're just working with everybody as we would normally work, assigning them a POC from the technical team and getting our admin and finance folks pulled in, and then having pretty regular meetings with everybody to make sure we're on track, plus the quarterly reporting requirements. And I'm happy to provide copies of anything we've done to include even, basic language from the contracts without the specific information on the awardees, the sub-awardees. If there's anything I can do to help make this an easier process for people, I'm really happy to do that. And that's pretty much it. And if you have any questions, my phone number is on there, and also Felicia Freeman or Andrea Fenwick or anybody from my staff can help you find the information that you need, or from EPA Region 4.
Great. Thank you so much, Leslie. That's incredibly valuable. And a reminder to everyone to go ahead and type your questions into the Q&A box, and then we'll go ahead and ask those questions and have our presenters answer them after our next presentation. So we'll go ahead and move on to our next presenter, and that's Hannah Humphrey. And Hannah is the director of the Financial Assistance Center in the Missouri Department of Natural Resources Water Protection Program. She's responsible for managing the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund programs and several state grant and loan programs. Hannah has worked for the department since 1996, and Hannah's going to tell us about their work plan process and some lessons learned, and also take your questions as well. So Hannah, the floor is now yours.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Alyssa. So Missouri was very pleased to receive a grant through the Assistance for Small and Disadvantaged Communities program last month. And so today I'm just planning to share some of the details on how we selected our project, our state match source, and how we put our work plan together. So next slide, please. First, we had some projects in mind, but our first step was really we needed to determine whether we could identify a source of state match funds. Consultation with our region revealed that we could use Community Development Block Grant Program funds, and that was a boon and a huge relief to us because our only other source that we had identified was that we do manage a small state revolving fund, and there's some details on the slide. It's unrelated to the drinking water or clean water SRFs. It's truly state money. And so we were looking at combining those two to put the match together for a project. Next slide. So while SRF staff were the lead for the application, we did really closely coordinate with our Public Water Supply System Supervision Program staff. We all agreed that we wanted to focus on using this grant to help a community build a solution. So we started by just making a list of all the smaller disadvantaged systems that either the SRF or our Public Water Supply Supervision branch were working with. We were looking at those that were going to need some infrastructure work. So we looked at our drinking water SRF IUP and at the enforcement targeting tool. So we started kind of big, and then we removed all the projects that were not small or disadvantaged. And we didn't at first remove the underserved, and a little more about that later. But then next we removed all the projects except all those that had an engineering plan with a cost. Because of the time frame for this grant, we wanted to pick somebody who we already had an engineering report, so we would know about what the cost was, and so we were ready to move right to design. Next slide, please. So we looked really closely at 5 projects that ended up all being projects that were on our intended use plan. Several were larger than the one that we ultimately chose, but Lanigan on the bottom row has been extremely difficult to help in spite of many years of work from our enforcement staff and staff, our regulatory staff in our regions also. Next slide, please. So then one of our staff honed in on something that some of the rest of us who were working on this had not noticed, and that was that the community really has to be underserved. So this is just my visual person explanation of the slide that Alyssa showed you earlier, which is basically it has to be underserved and it can be small or disadvantaged. And in Missouri, we do have a disadvantaged definition. It's here on the screen if you're interested in it. Next slide, please. So Lanigan turned out to be the only eligible project that we had for this grant, but also a very worthy project. You can see the match amounts that we came up with, and you will notice that this does lead to them being able to afford a bigger project than if they had gone through our Drinking Water State Revolving Fund program, which only offers 75% grant. We did use a spreadsheet when we were working with looking at more than one system that had some formulas in it that helped us, just be able to plug in amounts of match from Community Development Block Grant and our state fund, and then it would magically populate, how much the project cost could be. And I just wanted to point out that we have that, and if anybody's interested in it, you can feel free to let me know, and we're glad to share it. I think everything that accountants do is magic, I guess. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about the town that this grant is going to help in Missouri. Lanigan is a town of about 400 people. They've experienced a lot of challenges over the years. They definitely have socioeconomic challenges. Their median household income is less than $29,000 a year. Their rates for their water are already 2.5% of their median household income. They have been out of compliance for RADs since the 80s and have been in enforcement many years with many sort of failed solutions through the years. They actually, at one point, the court directed in a consent judgment that they connect to a nearby town, but the nearby town refused to connect them. So it's been an ongoing issue, and so we're looking forward to seeing them have that resolved and get safe water. They have also had a lot of challenges on the city's administration. A couple of years ago, they had a city clerk who was caught stealing, and she was just sentenced here in September last year. Next slide. So this is just kind of a summary of the grant. I won't belabor this, but I'll just point out again that our allocation was $747,000, but we are applying for a little bit less than that. Excuse me, and that is because we're limited by the available match that we have, since that can't be, the match has to be 45% of the project. So, and we could only come up with that, almost $600,000. So that gives them a total project that's $1.3 million. It will return them to compliance. It includes more distribution system work than their previously planned SRF project was going to be able to provide, and it will get them a greater percentage of grant funding for a project also, which we're really happy about. Next slide. So I'm going to switch now and talk a little bit about work plan preparation. My best advice is use EPA's guidance that in the summary, in the implementation document that EPA has put out. Appendix A is a summary of the key work plan elements. We copied, pasted that into a document and just used it as an outline and started to fill things in. Next slide. A couple of notes about that, just lessons learned for us that I'll share with you all, are that for section 1, be sure you really define your proposed project well. Document the eligibility of your proposed project, how the community is underserved and small or disadvantaged. Be sure that you mention if your project will include the purchase of land or need easements. And if it doesn't, include that statement that it does not include land or easements. Under roles and responsibilities, be sure you get everybody in there and provide the expectations for each. So for our work plan, we, the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, are the grant awardee, and we included, you know, an oversight role and a lot of assistance to the city. The Public Water System of Lanigan is the sub-awardee. Our colleagues at EPA Region 7 are included, and other funding agencies for us included Community Development Block Grant Program staff, and then of course the consulting engineer who designed the project and will be doing engineering oversight over construction. And here, be sure that also in this section that you know who is going to be responsible for funding operation and maintenance, whether it's the public water supply system or the state. And I think in many of the previous materials that we've all seen from EPA, it reads a lot as if it has to be the state who funds O&M into the future. But our understanding is that it can be designated as that public water supply system. And in our case, that is how we wrote this up, that the system of Lanigan, they're going to fund their own O&M, and you just need to be able to make that clear. For timelines and milestones, don't forget to add in quarterly reports and a final report because those are expected from this grant. Next slide, please. Section 2 is the programmatic priorities and strategic plan goals. So here you just need to provide a statement about how the project that you're proposing is going to meet those priorities and strategic goals. In Appendix A, it's listed, it's just a paragraph about what the goals of the grant are, and it's pretty easy just in a sentence or two to say how it matches those. Section 3, environmental results. Outputs you should list are going to be all those deliverables that you're going to have, an engineering report, the plans and specs, contract for construction, that sort of thing, AE agreements potentially too. And your outcome should be return to compliance with the National Primary Drinking Water Standards. And you could have other outcomes too, but you definitely need to ensure that should be an outcome if it's going to be a construction project. Section 4, your budget narrative, just lay out all your funding sources for the project. Even if you did it in the first part, go ahead and lay them out here. We did it in a table and thought that was helpful. And then also in your project budget estimate, where you lay out all the pieces of the project, again, our region wanted us to include also here who was going to fund operation and maintenance. Next slide. Some documents that you should provide to your region before you apply to get those details worked out are a draft work plan. Our region reviewed, gave us comments, we incorporated those, and that was a pretty easy process and pretty quick. Also, at this point, you need to attach documentation that you have from other funding agency commitments, particularly if those are going to be your match. So, you know, for CDBG, that would be funding approval. I know USDA RD offers letters of intent as a commitment. And also, we also completed the WIN Grant NEPA checklist. It's a form that you can get from if you can't find it, you can get it from your region. When we were able to document that our project would be categorically excluded, so that made things a little easier. Next slide, please. This is just a timeline to show how long the process took for us. We thought it was fairly simple. It had to go through about 6 people before it could get uploaded to grants.gov here internally for us. So that's, you know, that's a little bit of part of it is our own internal bureaucracy. It was a Valentine's Day present on February 14th when we learned the grant was awarded. And we're working through now some issues. We do have some pre-award costs that we're working with our region to try to make sure are included. Because this is a enforcement case and it's about safe drinking water to citizens, we've been working with the engineering firm to go ahead and have the design get done so that we'd be ready to bid very soon after the award of the grant. So we do have those design costs that we want to be sure get covered. And so that is brought us here to today. Next slide. So I think the plan is going to be in a minute to take questions from all the presenters together, but I just provided my contact information here so that anyone who's interested can feel free to contact me. If you'd like Missouri to share information that might help you apply for the grant for your state, just feel free to give me a call or email. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was excellent, and I think provided a lot of tips and advice for other states in the drafting of their work plans, and some really good lessons learned.